All right, we are live. Happy New Year!
Happy New Year.
Welcome back, everybody, to the first New Year's Indie Book Blitz of 2024. This is the 16th event in this year's New Year's Blitz, but the first one of 2024. We have four brave authors who are getting up in the morning after New Year's Eve to kick us off with books and, fittingly, time travel and historical fantasy and sci-fi this morning represented. We've got Michaela on, we have Geneva on, we have Emma on, and we have Larissa on. Welcome. It's so good to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So, for those who don't know you, because this is the first time you guys have been on the channel, why don't we go around? Michaela, you want to kick us off and we'll just sort of go in a clockwise circle. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what kind of books you write and what books you're known for.
Yeah, definitely. My name is Michaela Oberhofer. I've recently published my first debut novel. It's science fiction, fantasy, dystopian, futuristic, and it's called The Root of John's Happiness. This is a little cover for it. And it basically kind of covers a world where questioning has been deemed harmful. So it pulls on sociological thought process and the way that society rises and crumbles, but in like a fun science fiction way. My writing style, I kind of shift genres. I like to do science fiction. I've done a fantasy trilogy before that hasn't been published, and I'm currently working on a crime novel as well that's got lots of dark humor in it. So just constantly shifting is my style. Yeah, and lovely to be here.
I love all the different genres you bring in.
Oh,
because that means you're going to be able to tell us more easily what is the difference between these genres.
Yeah, I'm learning along the way as well. So.
Hey Luna, hey everybody who's joining. If you're joining live and you have questions for the authors about the books, about writing, drop them and I'll pull them over after everyone introduces themselves. Geneva, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for organizing this. Very happy to be here. I do have something very much in common with Michaela. I don't niche very well. So I have had previous lives where I was a lawyer. I have been an archaeologist, a stay-at-home mom for a while, and my entire life I've been an artist, and for a while I was an art teacher. And I've been telling myself I'm going to write a book since I was probably in elementary school. And I've been working on them. And, you know, like all of us, I think I have a stack of unfinished or finished manuscripts. And so now I finally have my first one seeing the light of day. So this is it. The Guildmaster's Daughter is a portal fantasy. I'm going to try to, which fantasy genre do I want to hit first? So it's historically set in the Regency era in New York City instead of England. So a little twist there. And it is about an artistically gifted young woman. So where did we get that inspiration from? Don't know. Who discovers the existence of a magic ink that turns imagination to reality. So think chalk pavement pictures and Mary Poppins kind of thing, except that the Guildmaster who controls the ink, who is her own stepfather, denies her access to it because she's a woman. So there's a lot of girl power theme and self-belief and self-agency, things I feel very strongly about. And then of course, set in a very imaginative, artistic world. So drawing on a lot of personal experience for this one. So this is my debut, but like everybody else, I have other stuff in the works, which would be a massive epic fantasy with dragons and the whole 9 yards. And then also pulling on my archaeological background, I have another one in the works set in ancient Egypt. So kind of like Michaela, a little bit of everything.
I love it.
Yes, I love it. And I love the take on bringing worlds to life, because as a dark fantasy author myself, I'm like, ooh, that could be used in a lot of very dark ways. And when you first said the stepfather, I was like, oh, well, the stepfather has a reason to be worried about, a child or a young person getting their hands on it, not knowing what they're doing, but not just because they're a woman. That's
well, and you're right on, is that there is a little bit of, it could be used dangerously. I mean, what if what you bring into the world is not good? So anyway.
Yes, we have our dragon lovers in the chat. Welcome back. Emma, it's so good to finally meet you. I know I have followed you on social for a while. It's just so nice to actually get to meet you face to face.
Nice to meet you too. Well, I've been around for a little bit. I've got a fantasy series called the Genesis Chronicles, so that's where I started. So I've got 3 books of those out already, and I'm working on the 4th and final book of that series. But last October, I debuted Beneath the Copper Sky, and it bends genre like everybody else, I think. It starts out as a mystery. It takes place on a moon of Saturn, Titan. So there's a colony there. There's a lot of themes about classism and how that all works together. And it starts out as a mystery where the main character, Hermione, comes back to her father's funeral. And she's told it's a mining accident, and she starts finding these clues that it isn't that at all. So she's trying to figure out what actually happened to her father. And as she gets deeper and deeper into this, she learns some things, and it takes a complete left turn. So really excited about this and working on the sequel to it right now. And it has a little bit of time travel. It's got some alien species in there, and it just kind of all melds together into something pretty awesome. So that's what I'm working on currently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been super busy.
Yeah. Oh, I like to stay super busy. Yeah.
Oh, it's
more stories than I have time to write at this point, but that's true for any author, I think.
I was gonna say I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Relate.
Yeah. Oh, first cat of the stream, first cat of 2024. Hi, Michaela's cat.
Of course, I'm at the back end of it right now, but
Oh, and Larissa, welcome. Oh, CH Smith is on. I do see your question. I'm going to pull it over right after we finish introductions. Larissa, it is so good to meet you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I write from Pennsylvania, and just like Geneva and Michaela, I kind of cross genre, a little bit of everything. In 2023, I published my Birthright of Scars duology. Whoops, it's not going to take them. But I published these, and it's about a renegade fighting to save his people from genocide, and he falls in love with his bounty hunter. And then they're forced to choose between their blood on each other's hands and the fate of an empire. So it's kind of a high stakes, high action, enemies to friends to lovers series. I'm currently working on expanding it with some interconnected standalones about side characters that are very important in these stories. And I'm hoping to bring both books to a dramatized audiobook in this year and 2025, hopefully as well. So yes, I'm from Pennsylvania. I live with a cute little African Tim the Gray parrot named Hercules. He's my writing buddy.
Aww.
Inspired and distracted. And I'm really excited about these books and passionate about where they're going as far as the whole series.
It's so good to have you on. And the parrot, I know we probably won't see the parrot walk across the background, but
he's in another room. He's in another room.
Does he know all your secrets though? Somebody can ask your parrot, like, what's going to happen?
He would talk, and it would end up on the live stream.
It's like, yes, you're going to give away spoilers. You're staying in the other room. Yeah, so Craig's kicking us off with, how do you keep up with timelines? On that note, how do you keep up with historically accurate specifics within your timelines?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to start on this one can take it, and everybody can take a turn chipping in.
Okay, well, I'll start because with my archaeological background, obviously do a lot of research, and I think one of the dangers of what not to do, which I can say from experience, is originally I wanted to write a book set in ancient Egypt, a historical fiction kind of book, and I ended up researching myself into a degree. Didn't get the book written, but I have a degree in Egyptology. So that's what not to do, because you can really get bogged down and wrapped around the axles about trying to solve every problem that the entire discipline has ever come up with. So that's what's not to do. So you definitely want to do your research, obviously, so that the people who are in the know don't want to, put your book down because of some terrible inaccuracy. But at some point, you also just have to like move on, especially in the fantasy genre. You can play with things a little bit. It can be a little bit more speculative. You can move things around. So the way I keep track of it is, you have to find a research style that works for you. But I start out with a very sort of academic, note taking. You find a computer program that works for you. And then as far as working it into your book, as you do your research, you typically will find that things you learn about the historical period will then re-inform your plot line. And in order to keep track of all of that, I personally use an app, if we're allowed to plug stuff, called Plotter, Plottr. And it's just a timeline application. And you can make multiple lines, sort of at an index card on the cork board kind of thing, but on your computer, where you can move everything around. And you can and one of my lines is always my historical timeline, so that if I'm going to diverge from it, I'm doing it consciously. And then I can make the rest of my, story beats or anything else fall in line with that historical timeline. So that's how I do it. Does anybody else have a better solution? I'm always on the lookout for good tips.
No, I'm old school. So pen and paper, and I just lay it out, do my research, determine what's relevant to the story, and leave the rest alone. So I don't, for the first book, for Beneath the Copper Sky, I didn't have a lot of historical reference, but I did reference like Voyager probes going by Saturn. And then I also, the Hoyan probe was also featured in there a little bit. So there's a little bit of research, but I didn't like go overboard as far as this, history of space exploration and that kind of thing. So whatever was relevant to Titan, that's what I kept it to.
Are those topics that you're naturally interested in? And
oh yeah, it's my special interest.
Perfect. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, I'm actually very similar. I'm old school. I feel like my brain works better when I write things down. And I kind of just like, because when I type it, it just, for some reason, it doesn't translate properly. And sometimes my brain doesn't want to write it down in like sentences, and I can kind of story map it out and kind of build it off from there. So for me, that's just how my brain works. My current book is technically dystopian speculative. So there isn't as much historical research in that. And in fact, for me, that's one of those things that it scares me just a little bit, because I want to make sure that it's like perfectly accurate. So that would take a lot more of that time, but it does have pulls on what's it called, philosophy. Like the whole basis of the society is off of the Meno paradox that Socrates had. So I did lots of research into philosophy. I had a couple books. For me, honestly, having a couple books on the subjects. My first ever book that I ever wrote was a high fantasy trilogy, and it was on Greek mythology and the Fate Sisters. So when I did that one, I spent like most of my time, before writing it, was just research, reading up everything I could from different resources. And then it sounds like a lot of work, but what works best for my brain is that I remove everything that I have, like all of my documentation, and I just take a blank piece of paper, or as many, probably a stack would be better. And I just go ahead and I try to write down everything that I know on the subject. And it unlocks the stuff that I know, because there's too many times where I'm like, I've spent, days, weeks, months researching, and I don't know like how much I actually know on the subject. But once I actually write it all down, I surprise myself, and it kind of reiterates in my head what information I do know, or where do I need to find that information to make it more accurate. So, but it's a lot of work, writing down all those pages, but it's just how my brain works.
I would agree with everything you said. I'm pretty similar, but I found myself doing line graphs and just making like a little blurb about how things line up. Like I'll have 2 parallel line graphs and then just put little info bits there to help make sure everything.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I guess I'm more visual in the way I map it out.
Which is funny because we work in words, but like our brains can be visual too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great question. CH. So I made a decision. Historical and time travel stuff is not in my wheelhouse.
It's good. It's important
Now,
to
I
know
am going to
what you
say that
don't
while I
like
don't,
as it is what you do like.
right. Yeah. I have used time travel as a side trope in one book, and CH knows what book that is. But it's part of a spoiler, so I'm not going to say which book it is here on this. But it was fantasy world to fantasy world, which makes it a little easier, I think, because then you don't have to worry about does it match up, because you make up everything. But even then, I think it's important to keep in mind and be willing to put in the extra world building for how are they going to act in a different time? How are they going to act in a different place? How did they dress different? How did they talk different? How did they eat different? If they can understand what everybody's saying 500 years later, why? Things like that. But yeah, as a pantser, I think this might be part of why I don't ever reach as much into this genre as much as I love to read it. I love reading your books. I'm not going to probably write as much of it myself. I did have another question about genre for you guys, which is where the line falls between alternative reality versus that historical fiction. Because a lot of times you hear the stories that are like, this is an alternate history, alternate reality. And then it's got some similarities in events. But then you have historical fiction, which in a way I think readers almost assume are going to be truer to historical events. So how does that play into your writing?
Well, so I think you kind of just defined the outer parameters of it, is that if you're talking about historical fiction, at least, and we'll see what everybody else thinks, but to me, the historical fiction genre is exactly that, where you are trying to stay within the historical guidelines, and that's where you're going to do your research and try to be as accurate as possible. But if you are throwing that speculative element in there and you're doing an alternate timeline, you're asking a question of how would things be different if, and you're changing something very specific. Now you still have to do your research because it has to make sense what unfolds from making that one change. And then there's also, of course, the research that goes into any time period so that, you know, you understand the technology of the time period or the speech patterns or all those kinds of things. Because unless it's sort of the steampunk kind of alternate history, those things are going to have stayed the same. And it's usually people's thought processes or reactions that would change the plot line, I think. So I think you've actually really set the outer bands of that. And then, of course, there's always things that kind of cross genre and blur the lines. But I definitely think historical fiction, if I were looking for a book and I typed in the search historical fiction, I would expect something to be very accurate to the time period. And just the purpose of that is not specifically the fantasy, but to let me experience that time period in a fictionalized setting, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I was going to say, I fully align with that. And I think with the book that I'm writing, it's dystopian speculative. So it pulls on that idea of like, there is a backbone, there's a grounding point of historical accuracy, because you're pulling on something generally, at least for my book, that was like our current society. So you have to have certain things that fall under that. But then once you push past that, you have this situation of like, okay, well, what made it change and how and why? And that's where the speculation comes in. So I feel like that can be the difference for me as well, is when you're talking about historical fiction and you're talking about like pulling on like facts and history, having some form of like almost like a waypoint, something that like grounds you to hold your basis off of. And then when you're working with speculative, that's when you kind of move past that and you kind of start to explore different options. You know, like in my book, for instance, we talk, the story of it comes from the idea of like, what if we had all these problems like we do currently, you know, climate change, sociological structures, poverty, you know, just the way that we're set up and all the problems, and the government couldn't find answers, or they decided that it was too hard. And so they pushed forward with this idea that questioning was the problem, that it was having these questions relevant in our minds was causing us more harm than good, because they could not answer these big problems with an easy answer. So it pulls on this idea that of a reality that could happen. Hopefully, dear God, doesn't happen, but it pulls on this idea of like, you take something real and then you look at it from a different perspective of what if they went this way with it. So for me, that's where speculative and dystopian plays into historical fiction, because you can use historical accuracy as your ground point and then like branch off from there in a science fiction way.
For me, with Birthright of Scars Rising, or Birthright of Scars, I kind of had to take it historically from a technological advancement perspective. There's a little bit on the social side as well, but even though it's it's like a second world sci-fi fantasy, technology still evolves along a certain path. And so even though they're not using a fuel-based system to power their vehicles, there's still going to be this invention leading to this invention to this invention. And that had to make sense, because it's gonna mimic the way we've evolved technologically in some regards. And that also affects socially how they've progressed as a society. So I really had to think about that and parallel it in some ways. And then, you know, where it diverges, it's like, how does this make sense? You know, that they're different than us culturally in this aspect.
I haven't really dabbled with alternate timelines at all. So I can't speak to that as a writer. I've seen it done really well in different shows and books. Like For All Mankind kind of pops into my head because that one starts out where it diverges. What if America wasn't the first country on the moon and the Russians won that war, and then it diverges from there. So I think it's a really cool concept. I just haven't done that personally, and I'm not sure how I would tackle that. With the sequel that I'm doing, there's, time travel involved. So I'm looking at like the 90s as that time period. And so I just kind of approach that as I do with any world building, only we're just using historically accurate, things that happened during the 90s to kind of flesh out that world building instead of just making it up completely, which I did for the fantasy series. It's just like, this is a different world. I'm just going to go with it. I'm using historical references, but I'm not bound by making it historically accurate like I would for something like this. So it's an interesting problem to work out, and I think it's fun to work out those things and how you work it into your story. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating when you read other people's books and see how they're doing it. And it's just very exciting and interesting and a lot of fun. So yeah, maybe we will get an extra degree doing all this, but it's fun. Okay.
That's when you're interested in it. You just you go down the rabbit hole of that's why I was asking about, the satellites and the space stuff that you were mentioning, is that an area of interest?
I follow that like people follow the draft. So, I'm awesome. Like, okay, what are the new things coming out in 2024? What are they putting up, and what's going to hit Jupiter at what time, and how far is the Dragonfly program going for Titan? And they delayed it, so now I'm disappointed. But so I'm following this as closely as some people follow the draft. So
that's cool. Something you said made me want to follow up really quickly, pertinent to this question about what distinguishes historical fiction and sort of the alternate reality. Is those of you who are writing sci-fi are looking backwards, and the dystopian are looking backwards to a time period as a foundation. And I think one of the interesting things that we all have to do when we're using historical periods is to decide how accurate to be to that. Like you were saying, like you went back and you wanted it to be accurate to the 90s. But I found when I was writing my book, I had to make a decision whether or not, I mean, obviously I wanted to set it in this Regency era and have the right mannerisms and all the stuff that people expect of that time period. But then I had to decide, do I use actual historical figures? Because since mine stays in that time period, I had to decide, because somebody has to be the villain. And so if that's a reasonable historical character, like, how does that feel? And I did decide to do that. So, but for you guys who are looking backwards, maybe, you know, it's easier, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe you want to have somebody make an alternate decision, so you make up a president or something like that. But for me, I made the decision, and it took a while to get there, of every single person, event, everything in my book, except for the fantasy element and the main character, are 100% accurate. In fact, I even built the plot around, like, they went to a party on this date. I mean, like, everything that I could ascertain, the paintings that the people painted and the you know, relationships that they had are all there. And then I injected the fantasy, the one character, and then the fantasy world that's parallel. And so I think that's actually where those two blur, between historical fiction and then injecting that fantasy, where now you're talking about something very speculative. So decisions that we have to make. Do you stay historically accurate, or do you just embrace the fact that you're speculating and you need somebody to make a different decision, so you just make up a character? Because that's why, you know, that's the fun of fantasy.
Yeah, definitely. I personally, for me, I haven't actually come across a situation where, like, I put in a historical figure. I do really love to put it in a humorous way, where there's conversation between characters and they're talking about them and they reference it, and it might not be a direct name, but like a description and like a play on the name, to make it be like as if the reader and me have, like, we're in on a joke because we know about that person, because they're part of our history. So those are some of the soft ways that I've done it. But I really love the way that you described how you added actual historical figures and, like, the accuracy of, like, knowing what party they were on this date. Like, it's kind of inspired me to want to do that now. I think that's
cool.
So yeah, I haven't done that yet, but you never know. Maybe in a year or so,
There you go.
I'll reach out and be like, hey, I did that. It was so much fun. So much work, but fantastic. I love it.
Walking away.
Yeah.
Larissa, you have anything you want to add before we hop on over to talking about 2024?
I'm not sure. I think I'm ready to move on.
All right, awesome. So 2024, we are in it. You're the first panel of it. This is your first bookish thing. But besides this, what is coming up with you guys in 2024? Are you doing any live events? Do you have any releases? Let's know what we need to look out for. And people watching, you can follow everybody at the links in the description box if you're watching on YouTube. I put them all there. So take it away. Emma, you want to start us off?
Sure, I'll start. What I'm planning on doing is I've got several short stories from my fantasy series that I've kind of written about side characters. So I'm planning on compiling those into one anthology and getting that released sometime by the middle of next year. Not next year, this year, 2024. And then I have the final book of that series that I want to release by the end of 2024. So there's a lot of work that has to be done with that. And then I'm planning, I want to get the sequel to Beneath the Copper Sky drafted. That is like the big goal. I really, really want to get that one done, so I can have that released for 2025. So, it's complex, but I really love the main character, and I think I'm going to have a lot of fun with it. So got a lot of ideas. I'm kind of a pantser, so I mean, I do my work up front with the world building and the character development, but as far as the plot goes, it just runs. As soon as I have all that figured out, then I just sit down and write it and see where the character takes me. So yeah. So that's where I'm at. I just need to sit down and actually do it now. I've got most of the world building done. I just got to do it now. So get the butt in the chair and do it.
Go all Shia LaBeouf on yourself for 2024. Just
Yeah.
do it. How about you, Larissa? What's coming up in 2024?
As I mentioned before, I'm going to be crowdfunding the dramatized audiobook for Birthright of Scars Rising. And that should take place in April, and then hopefully the production will happen in the summer, and I'm hoping to have it published by fall. So that's like the major project of 2024. And then amidst all that craziness, I'm almost 80,000 words into the rough draft of one of the interconnected standalones I mentioned. And then I'm 10,000 words into the sequel of that story as well. So that's like already multiple books kind of branching out there. And then I've got my first Comic-Con. I've put in for a spot at my first Comic-Con in August. On August 24th, the 4-state Comic-Con in Harrisburg this year. So I'm super stoked about that. And I'll probably be looking for different merch and print items of my artwork to display and be ready for that.
Yeah, I missed this question from Luna, and then we're going to go ahead and go back to Geneva and Michaela. But would you say that research adds an extra challenging element to your writing then?
Yes, it does. And that's what makes it so much fun. I like to make it as complex as possible. That just seems to be the way I do it. But yeah, it does. Short answer, yes.
It's a rabbit hole. One thing leads to the next. Like
we already know Geneva got a whole college degree.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I didn't know this thing, and it throws a wrench in your plot. You thought you were going to actually help yourself, and then you have to go back and rewrite part of your plot because it doesn't work. So you can end up down a rabbit hole and more frustrated than when you started.
Amen. And then there's also the time when you're writing and then you'd like to just, I don't know, do you guys use placeholders? I use a lot of placeholders and then go back and research after the fact. But sometimes you can't move on. You just need an answer.
All
And
caps,
so
research this.
Yeah, research this. Like it's in big brackets and a different color. Research this, or insert thing here. But sometimes you can't move on because like the answer to that is going to totally inform whatever they do next. And it's just like, oh, could they have done this at that time? Let's go find out. And off to Google you go. And yeah, so yeah, it definitely adds an element where I think if you're writing something purely fictionalized, the only thing you might want to, or fantasy, the only thing you're going to want to go check is, how far can a horse travel, heavily laden and things that, we kind of encounter in all fantasy. Or, for the sci-fi, some, vaguely scientific things to base, your travel or your tech on. But other than that, if you're doing pure fantasy, you just go with it. But when you're doing something historical, yeah, there's speed bumps for sure.
Yeah.
In my current work, I had to do a lot of research on stones and forges and how forges, furnaces, and foundries work because it's set at a labor camp where these prisoners are doing the work in a furnace, forge, and foundry. And they're trying to get the forge to collapse on itself. So they're trying to find a way to dissolve the stone on the foundations of these two pillars that hold the forge up. And since it's a fantasy, I can kind of create my own rock for them to dissolve and its own unique properties, but it still has to like fit into like, is it metamorphic? Is it igneous? Is it sandstone? Like, and just kind of makes sense. It's not just this rock that could not possibly exist, It can get kind of hairy with figuring out the porousness of stone and what eats it away and at what rate and everything like that.
And you probably never would have predicted that you'd suddenly be like a rock and forge expert, right?
Well, I actually do love rocks. I collect some precious stones, but the forge furnace is not required to. Metallurgy is not my thing.
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the secret talents of writers is the amount of random knowledge that we have. Like, we're all probably really good at trivia because we have these random facts that we had to research. And we didn't think that we would be here researching this specific reason on why they did it this way and how to craft it that way. But that it fits for your world and for your characters and you want to have that accuracy. And I feel like also as it presents its own challenges, being like having to do research, I think there's also a little bit of comfort because I've done high fantasy and I've also done a crime one that I'm working on that has to be very accurate because it's set place in my city of San Francisco in the 80s. So I want to make sure it's like very accurate. And my current book, Science Fiction Fantasy, it pulls on history. So, but what I noticed was there's actually a little bit of comfort of researching, because in the high fantasy, with the amount of details that I had, I relied on my own brain to remember the reasons behind these historical parts that I wrote. Like I have to go through my own pages, whereas with the historical stuff that's actually accurate, I can just Google it and be like, wait a second, why did this happen? And I could look it up. I'm relying on my own brain, which, I don't think I should rely on it all the time. There's too much going on up there, too many worlds, that there is a little bit of comfort to back the pressure of writing for historical as well.
I do have a secret weapon. For like my fantasy series, I had to really research a lot of anthropology, but that's my husband's special interest. So a lot of times I would just go, what would happen in this case, in this type of what technologies would they have, would advance, and how would that work? And, it's a hunter-gatherer society. So what kind of food would be, accurate for that kind of thing? And sometimes I just turn and ask him a question, like, and he'll just spew out a bunch of facts. More than I need, but it's a great resource, so I don't have to Google it. I just have to hey, honey, by the way,
having a
like living with a
expert
nurse
in the house would be handy for sure.
Yeah, it's like living with a nurse, except for your writing. It's like, tell me this. So Geneva, what's coming up in 2024 for you, bookish events-wise?
So many things. No, I'm a classic over planner. In the sense that my eyes are way bigger than the number of hours in the day. So with the debut book, I mean, like I said, I have a stack of manuscripts. I think like all of us are talking about, we have the book that's out right now, but we're all, sitting on other projects that, are in various stages of completion. So it's really just a plan to keep driving ahead on those. Like I had mentioned, historical fiction / fantasy set in ancient Egypt, and which I had started working on so long ago, but really now that this book, this one was a standalone, this one was, a much more contained idea. So now I'm kind of working on the things that were larger ideas. So I want to get those out into the world. And then there's this epic fantasy, the one I alluded to, with dragons and mythical creatures and all kinds of stuff. And what I think is a pretty unique magic system. And that one is where my head lives all the time. Like I'm driving and, things about that story just pop into my head, or, shampoo. There's something magical about shampoo. You have the most amazing ideas while you are shampooing your hair. I don't know if anybody else has this, but yes, there's massaging the scalp, something, I don't know what it is, but so anyway, the epic fantasy lives rent-free in my brain at all times. And I'd kind of like to evict it and get it out into the world. So hoping actually by the end of this year to have the first book of both of the Egypt and the epic fantasy out. Probably Egypt summer, and then epic fantasy, late fall, is the goal. And then of course there's also just the learning curve of, you've got this debut book out into the world. I did the writing, the editing. I even did the cover art myself. All of those were learning curves. And now I'm learning, the marketing. It's like, how do you get people to review it? And where's the best place to, do you like Goodreads? Do you like Story Origin? Do you like, where are people going? And so there's just a lot of book related stuff all together. But I think, getting a couple other books out into the world and continuing to learn about the industry is really what 2024 is going to be all about.
Yeah. Exciting year. Love that you're diving into epic fantasy. That's like, yay.
Dragon. If you could see the bookshelf over here, dragons. So that's where my heart is.
Awesome. Michaela, how about you for 2024? What's coming up?
Yeah, so my book came out actually in November 30th, so it's a very recent debut. Yeah, exciting. And so I have lined up a few what's it called, author events at local bookstores. I am right there with Geneva in the sense that I set up way too much for myself than I can handle, but you shoot for the stars, and what's it called? I personally reached out to I think about like 50 different bookstores throughout the California coast because I live in California, and I got about 25 of these bookstores to want my book on their shelves, which is I was excited for just one. Like I was just like, yay, I got one. But my goal is to take the time to personally go to each one of them. One, I just want to see the book on their shelves. Like that's going to be big for me. But also, a lot of them are really excited to have me do an author event. So on my events page on my website, I have a calendar and I'm going to start adding them. I have a few set up, but as the new year starts, they're gonna contact me to really start setting up some of these events because with the holidays and everything like that, they've been a little bit preoccupied. I can't imagine why. So yeah, that's a big thing on my list is. And same with like marketing, I feel like I've become a marketing guru just based on, what I've had to do to promote my own work. I also did the cover art for my book as well. So thank you. So, there's lots of different skills that I feel like we wear many hats as writers. And at first they seem terrifying, and I wouldn't say that I'm seasoned in any of these skills, but I definitely I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable, kind of approaching some of these different styles, from the art to the marketing and the like. Still terrifying every day, but it's also fun and it's exciting. So yeah, and then I'm currently, I really want to finish my crime novel. It's called Coffee, Two Sugars. And if you think about Lemony Snicket, where you have an unreliable narrator that adds humor to a dark premise, that is kind of what the book is about. And it's a detective in the 80s in a different form of San Francisco, like one where it was a bit more technologically inclined for its time period. But it pulls on that era, but in like a different, different way. So I'm really excited for that one. It's my favorite thing that I've done. I mean, I feel like most writers, it's like their most current work is their favorite thing because they're working on it. But I'm doing it very different than I've ever done any piece of work. And it's a bit terrifying, but I'm going into it without any outlining, without any mapping. And it's basically like pressing play on a movie. And I just let the scenes come to me one after the other. So I don't even know who the killer is. It's a crime book. I'm excited to learn, as I'm doing it. So there's lots of fun to that. But yeah, I'm just really excited to finish that and then just keep with the, author journey and see where it takes me.
Awesome. Well, I wish you all the best. That's a lot of author events to line up for a year. And yeah, it's exciting to see your books in stores. And I'm so excited.
That's a 50% success rate. That is amazing.
Oh, that is amazing.
There is a video. If you're watching and you're a writer and you're like, man, I wish I could put my books in stores. There's a video on my Indie Author Behind the Scenes playlist where Andrew and Patricia Meredith came on. And Andrew had experience working at Barnes & Noble before self-publishing, but they have books in Barnes & Noble stores. And they share some of their tips and tricks for approaching stores and getting your books into like brick and mortar stores if that's something you're interested in.
That's awesome.
So yeah, but thank you all so much for being here, for helping me kick off the new year with books. This has been great.
Thanks for having us. This has been wonderful. My first ever panel.
So much.
Oh, yay! It's always the most nerve-wracking the first time. You did awesome. Yeah, thank you all so much. I wish you all the best in the new year. And if you're watching and you'd like to meet more indie authors, you can catch the first 15 indie author events of this Blitz in the playlist on my channel and subscribe because we have more panels coming through the week and into early next week. Thank you all so much. Take care. Happy New Year.
Bye.